friends. Welcome to Zach and Brian Watch the Watchmen. I'm Brian, and with me, as always, as the title suggests, is Zach. We are here to talk about the first episode of the Watchmen television series. Debuted on HBO last night as you're hearing this. The episode is titled It's Summer and We're Running Out of Ice, which is a reference to a song lyric from the musical Oklahoma. Before we go any further, if you have not watched the show and you don't want to be spoiled, turn around right now, because there's almost nothing we're going to talk about here that isn't going to constitute a spoiler of some kind. So you've been warned. Watch the show, then come listen to us talk about it. So, Zach, before we get into sort of the minutia here, I think you and I had very similar initial reactions to this episode. So tell me what you told Vince when Vince asked you, is this good?
Well, oh man, you're putting me on the spot. I think I said that it was not. I think I said it was okay and not a train wreck.
I think you said you don't know yet, but
I did say that.
but
That
you
is
said
correct.
it's
Yeah.
not bad.
Yeah, I did. That is exactly what I said. Thank you for cataloging my words better than I did.
I was looking at a text message. I'm not exactly
Uh,
a genius here. But no, I think that's a good place to start. This episode definitely feels unlike the comic Watchmen. Would you agree with that?
I think so, but I also feel like I remember saying, or if I didn't say it, I thought it. I think that if you squint hard enough, it could almost pass as Watchmen.
There are definitely aspects of Watchmen in it, but it's not trying to necessarily cop the Watchmen vibe the whole time.
No, it's not.
Um, and so I guess I have a ton of notes here. Uh, Not everything that I wrote down is stuff we should talk about necessarily, but
hmm
I think we should definitely touch on some of this stuff. So I'm just going to start on my list. Do you have stuff you definitely want to talk about, or do you just want me to sort
There
of?
there are a few big things, but I imagine that it will probably come up naturally as you go through your notes.
Okay, sure. All right. So, um, the episode begins with what I thought was newsreel footage of Hooded Justice, and you're watching this sort of, or not newsreel footage, but like a silent film about Hooded Justice. And I was like, that's weird. That time frame doesn't really work out. But we see somebody, you know, riding a horse with a executioner's hood on. But it turns out it's not that. It is a film of Bass Reeves, the Black Marshal of Oklahoma, and we are in 1921 for the Tulsa Massacre, formerly known as the Tulsa Race Riots. So, Zach, you are obviously not from Tulsa, but you are
No, but
from.
I have a lot of friends who are,
Oh,
which
really? Okay.
is yeah, yeah.
But you are from a part of the country that is much closer to that than I am.
Yes,
And
yeah.
so I was wondering, were you aware of the Tulsa Massacre before this? Because I certainly was not.
Yeah, so I mean, I think so I can't say that I for sure knew about it before I started kind of like learning about or like reading about the show, but I do think that it had been at least kind of like touched on in some early press stuff for the show, and so I definitely was aware of it beforehand, but I can't say for sure when I knew about it for sure. I want to say it was more recent than not.
Okay. I'm going to compare this, and folks, if you don't want to hear us talk about Lost and the Leftovers, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Um,
Sorry.
yeah, but this opening very much reminded me of the season 2 of the Leftovers opening, where it's that like prehistoric mother and child scene,
hmm
where it's this like tonally, um, this sort of tonally reverent or relevant rather scene that initially does not have much to do with the episode at all.
Sure, sure. And kind of along the same lines, the opening to season three does a similar thing with the kind of like religious community
Yes.
um,
Yeah,
that
I
it
forgot
opens
about
up
that.
with,
Yeah.
or yeah, kind of awaiting like a rapture event.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I agree with that. Like, definitely, I don't like. I definitely don't want this whole podcast to just like turn into a kind of like Lindelof wankfest thing, but
But it
it's like
probably
very
will.
much in his style, you
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
or in the style of things that he has done previously.
Yes. Agreed completely. Um, so that's sort of the opening, and we're following this young boy who is basically sent out of Tulsa by his parents by any means possible to get him safe. And the scene is just very viscerally disturbing. It's violent, it's horrific what the Klansmen there are doing. Everything about it is really tough to watch.
It's excruciating, I think, like the degree of violence and how it's portrayed. And on one hand, I think like, you know, it's probably best that it wasn't underplayed. Like
Yeah,
I think it needed to have that gravity, but it's extremely difficult to watch.
it is. Um, there was one note that I took that I think is both possibly a thing that was considered, but also possibly me just being up my own ass about this stuff. But essentially, the little boy in the beginning of that episode is given the Superman origin and the Moses origin,
Yes,
where
yes,
where you
100%. I
know
had that exact same thought.
yeah
Yeah.
where
No, that
his parents know that they're doomed and they send him off in search of a better life.
100%. I felt that as well, and I think that had to have been intentional.
Yeah. Um, and there's a note given to him. Um, so here's going to be a leitmotif for the first few episodes of this show too, folks. Do you know what the note says yet, Zach?
You mean the side of the note that was written on, or like
Yes.
the yeah, yeah, it says something along the
It
lines
says
of
watch over
take
this
care of this
boy.
boy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
watch over this
Right.
boy.
So
Yeah.
the reason I said this is going to be a leitmotif of our show is I did a Watchmen press junket a few weeks ago, so I had to watch the first 4 episodes in order to interview the people on the show. And Zach has only seen the pilot right now, so
Ye-
I
Yeah.
am going to be very careful to not spoil anything for him or for you guys. But so I mentioned at the beginning that it's summer and we're running out of ice is a reference to um, a line in the song "Judd is Dead," "Poor Judd is Dead" from Oklahoma, and we get the first bit of Oklahoma very very early in this episode, where we see um, the uh, the sheriff, I believe is the title, captain, I believe, of the Tulsa police force and his wife watching Oklahoma, something that will later be referred to as Black Oklahoma because it is an entirely African American cast doing the production of Oklahoma. I played bass in the pit band for Oklahoma in high school, so I have some familiarity with Oklahoma. Did you have any familiarity
I
with the
have
play?
zero familiarity with Oklahoma, and in fact, I think you had mentioned after watching the first episode that a familiarity with Oklahoma may or may not spoil or heavily hint at things that happen in the first episode.
Would you agree with that now? No, now having seen it.
I mean, I still have only seen like I still only know like that one song from Oklahoma now and the bit that plays at the end. Um, so I don't quite necessarily. I kind of can infer what you were talking about,
Okay.
but I still know nothing about Oklahoma really.
Okay, you don't need to really know it. The thing where I'm kind of going in order here with the show, so I don't want to
Hmm.
say the thing that I guessed
Sure,
yet.
we can get to it at the
Yeah,
end.
let's do it
Yeah.
at the end. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So one of the things that I found really interesting about the lead up to this show, is a lot of people, including our beloved Vince, were very critical of the idea of sort of the way that the police were going to be represented in the show, and
Yeah.
we get the beginnings of how the police are represented in this pilot. We see I guess this actually happened before the Black Oklahoma scene, but we see a police officer pull over somebody and essentially, well, people are listening to this have watched the show, so I'm not going to go beat by beat, but we see the police officer essentially shot down by a member of the 7th Cavalry, which we'll get to more in a second. But we see that there are police protocols, like all the police officers are wearing masks. They have to basically request the use of their firearm because their firearm is locked in their police car and they cannot, get to it. Um, I think it's actually a very interesting take of sort of how how police work in this world. Did you
Hmm.
find it as problematic as the sort of description of the show led it to be?
So I really want to talk about this. Is one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk the most about, because actually like just yesterday, I saw an article kind of talking about this and saying, I think the headline was something along the lines of Watchmen wants to make you hate white supremacists by making you love cops. And after watching this episode, I think that's a little disingenuous because, as we'll get to, I think the show really makes you want to hate both
Yes,
in
and the
some
more you
ways.
watch, I think that will become more clear as well.
So, but I thought that this scene in particular was really interesting, and kind of the episode in general. And I say interesting because I don't want to say good, because I don't know if it's good yet. But the show really does some weird, it does some interesting stuff with race,
Yes.
and plays with racial dynamics. It inverts racial dynamics a lot of times, and that's what I'm not sure is good or not. So, like for instance, in this episode or in this specific sequence, um, the police officer is African American. The man being pulled over is white, and the scene plays out with kind of um, the kind of sequence of events and the anxieties that you would expect from a situation with a flipped racial perspective.
Hmm.
Um, the white individual who's being pulled over has, kind of he puts his hands on the steering wheel. He's very cautious as he reaches over to his glove box. He's listening to hip hop in his car as he's driving. And I'm like seeing this and I'm thinking, okay, what is this trying to say? Is this saying anything of value? And I still don't really know.
That's a really interesting sort of place to maybe begin this conversation. Um, I would think that all of the things that you're talking about are intentional. I do not believe that anybody like didn't realize what they were doing with putting all those elements in there, the hip hop, everything else that clearly evoke the experience of being pulled over as an African American. An experience, by the way, we should say neither of us know shit about. Like
Right,
we should
right.
make it
We're
very
just
clear.
like, yeah, yeah, we're two white dudes. And
Yes,
so everything that we know is through stories and experiences of others.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. But I will also say that if you go down that line of thinking, there's a very problematic ending to the scene, which is that um, it turns out that he was correct to be pulled over. Like if I could see you saying like, well, if this is supposed to mimic the black experience, well, then are we saying that black men are dangerous? Um,
Sure. Well, and so but there's almost like an added wrinkle to it too, because so this is where I started to get worried in this scene, because I was afraid, oh no, this show is going to make us feel sorry for the white supremacists, because the man who is pulled over, yes, he attempts to murder this cop in just cold blood. Um, and yes, he did have a Rorschach mask in his glove compartment, but the police officer didn't believe him that he was just carrying lettuce in the back of his truck, which at the end of the scene after he shot him, he throws a lettuce leaf at him. And I saw that and I thought, is this trying to be a vindication of unjust profiling? You know what I mean?
uh huh.
And that I got really kind of worried about that. And I think that the rest of the episode shows that that's very like not what this is about. But
Right.
I guess like I was already like very heightened on edge about what this is trying to say. Um, and that scene was just very tense in general.
It was, yes. Um, And yeah, let's put that aside for a few minutes here. So that we get a scene a little bit later of basically, I mean, who would you call the protagonist of the show?
I would say Regina King's character.
Yes, Angela Abar is her name, I believe.
Hmm.
We see her at her child's school giving basically a baking lesson, and there are a number of things in this scene and in this classroom that are big hints to sort of like the overall Watchmen mythos, right? So we
Hmm.
see there's an anatomy of a squid poster that is hanging in the classroom. We see a poster of the American presidents, including Robert Redford as the recent president. Um, we hear about this event called the White Night. We hear the phrase Redfordations for the first time, which again that will come to play in future episodes a little bit. That's not too much of a spoiler, but there's sort of a lot of this scene has a lot of world building in terms of just giving you an idea of sort of what the everyday life is like in the wake of the events of Watchmen having happened 30 years earlier. What did you think of this aspect of the sort of the little winks and nods to things that had come before in the Watchmen universe?
So I thought it was really good. I thought it was good world building, because it plays on an understanding of Watchmen, in some really interesting ways. Like I don't think that you would pick up on a lot of the things, um, specifically like her being born in Vietnam,
Yes,
and
Vietnam is a state. I forgot to mention that. Sorry. Yeah.
yes, yes, yeah, and that, yeah, Vietnam being a state and her being born there, and then the presidential poster, kind of going from Nixon to, do you remember who the president was between Nixon and Redford? I think there was one other one.
Was there a president?
I
I
thought that there was maybe one more. I can't remember now, but um, and just kind of knowing, some of the stuff from Watchmen, was really helpful. But also, I think that the way that they wove it in and the way that they kind of presented things, like like the Redfordations and the White Knight, um, told you what you needed to know without beating you over the head with it.
yeah, I felt this was a very very effective scene for exactly what we're talking about. It just gave you a sense
Hmm.
of the world a little bit.
Yeah.
And this is all stuff that if it was doled out in like conversation in almost any other setting, it would have been very boring exposition.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are a couple of things that happen in the next scene that are wild. So the first one is that when driving home from school, Angela is speaking to Topher, her son, and they hear this like essentially an air raid siren go off and kind of get frustrated and pull the car over, and then you see a raining down of little tiny squids.
That seemed to like melt and just kind of disintegrate on impact.
Yes, and you can tell that everybody is like inconvenienced by this, but nobody seems all that scared by it. You get the impression this is something that just happens every now and then. And there are lots of implications for that because on one hand, at least so I figured, and part of this is probably because we are cursed to be reading Doomsday Clock right now, but part of me figured that the world had figured out that Veidt was full of shit.
Yeah, so I think I don't know if it's at this point in the episode yet, but you see like a newspaper headline that, or like a some news footage that says something like,
Veidt
Veidt
presumed dead or
presumed
whatever,
dead.
or
Yes,
declared dead.
declared.
Yeah,
Sure, sure. So like he is still in the news in the world at large, and um, I think that's a fair assumption. It may not be true, but I think it's a fair assumption.
and so but my point was that well, if they know that Veidt caused the squid thing, then how are there still squids falling from the sky? Like that
So
was.
there's
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, well, I was gonna say there's an interesting thing that happens a little bit later, that I know we'll get into, but in an interrogation scene, Tim Blake Nelson's character
Looking
has
glass.
what?
Looking
Yeah,
glass.
looking glass is his not vigilante, not
Yeah.
superhero, I guess his cop name.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a few minutes too.
Yeah, sure, sure. But he says something along the lines of, "Do you think that intradimensional attacks are the result of like a government ploy
Yeah,
or
yeah.
or some a government plot or something like that?" And I thought that that was interesting in relation to
Yes.
this.
Very much so. Yeah. Um I think no matter what you say about this show, I think one of the things that works about it is just how many mysteries are established in the first episode.
Yes, which is, one of the reasons I love this, why I love like the work of Damon Lindelof and people like him.
Yes, just these rich mysteries
Yeah.
that we will spend the rest of the season and possibly seasons, you know, um, just that will unfold, as
Hmm.
time goes on. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. Okay, so we then see Angela go to her bakery that she's going to be opening, and there's an old man outside the bakery, played by Louis Gossett Jr., who called me young man, or rather called me a young person at the press junket, which I appreciated. Who basically he talks to her for a second. He asks her, "Do you think I can lift 200 pounds?" Which is a hilarious old man thing to just like ask somebody. Um, but it turns out, spoiler alert, that will come into play later. Um,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to mention real quickly, we see some blimps during the scene with the squids, and blimps are a big thing in the original Watchmen, and it was interesting to see them still being a thing in the world of the TV show.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Dirigibles even.
yes, dirigibles, yes, even uh, back on our bullshit. So first of all, I love that the name of the bakery is the Milk and Hanoi instead of Milk and Honey. It's
Uh,
a clever
yeah.
play on words there. Um, and the password that Angela uses to get into like the back of the bakery, where it's basically her bat cave, is 1985.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is obviously the year that the original Watchmen graphic novel will take place. And I should say, Damon Lindelof said very clearly a couple of times, the comic is canon. Everything that happened in the comic happened in the world of this show. Um, so yeah, that's important to know. So we're about to get one of my favorite parts of the show, which is the reveal of American Hero Story, the show within a show.
Yeah.
It's
Which is such a Watchmen thing.
it is.
Even Doomsday Clock is doing it.
Yes. So there is this show called American Hero Story that is essentially what it sounds like. It's a like a dramatic retelling of the story of the Minutemen and the heroes of the time, and I just think it's a very funny idea and one that's executed pretty well in this first episode.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so I want to get into just a couple more things, and then we'll get to the end of the episode. Have I skipped anything yet you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so yet.
Okay, well, let's holler if I do. So we get a scene at the sort of police headquarters here, and this is where we see that it looks like sort of the uniformed rank and file cops all wear yellow masks and are just officer or whatever. And then it seems like once you get to detective, maybe you are given a different mask, a mask that you get to choose, and you adopt some sort of code name.
Yeah.
So we meet Looking Glass. Angela's name is Lady Knight.
Or I thought it was Sister
Oh,
Night.
sorry, Sister Knight. You're right, Sister Knight.
Yeah. Because she kind of has kind of a nun-esque
Yes, she does.
look. In fact, I think she's even described as looking like a nun by the 7th Cavalry guy that she hauls in.
Yes. So we start to get a little bit more of an understanding about the Seventh Cavalry in this sort of police briefing scene. Uh,
Probably like the most overt, well, one of two extremely overt Watchmen callbacks in the episode.
yes. What was the one you were thinking of from this scene specifically?
From this scene specifically, there is so we see Angela come into this room where all of the officers are gathered and they're watching like a video, a recording of the 7th Cavalry members, and there's one kind of that has the focus. He's kind of in a pulpit type setting. Um, and he is essentially like quoting Rorschach's opening monologue from Watchmen, um, and kind of heralding in this return of the 7th Cavalry.
Yes. They also refer to it as the Seventh K a number of times.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
guess Cavalry is spelled with a K, which again has very like white supremacist roots with the Ku Klux Klan. Taking
yeah,
a word
definitely.
"clan" that is a C word and turning it into a K word. So there's that. So there's a little bit here where I first of all I never took Latin in school, so I was not exactly certain what. But the police meeting ends with Don Johnson's character Judd saying, I believe it's "Quis custodiet ipso custodios," and that means "Who watches the Watchmen." I looked it up.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
that is like
Um,
their phrase they say at the end there.
Sure, sure. There's a really key thing that I don't want to like spend a ton of time on, but they talk a little bit about the kind of bylaws that are governing police officers now,
Yes.
and there's this law where the only way to lethal or to legalize like full lethal force, and I think it's only for a 24-hour period, is if a majority of the police force feels that they are threatened or in imminent danger, which they do that. And it seems like a pretty thin protection against the kind of things that we are seeing today. Which, like, one thing I did kind of want to say is like this is the most like 2019 show that I think could exist.
Yes.
You know, or the most, not even that, the most like Trump era show that could exist.
Agreed.
Um, Vince asked us in our text chat whether or not there were any overt Trump allegories or references, and I said no, not exactly, but the whole thing is just stewing in current American like socio-political landscape.
Yes. Yes. Agreed. So we also we begin to see some of the more masks that people are wearing, some of the other masks people wear here, and so we see and these are not spoilers. There's a character whose name is Red Scare, who is wearing like a red ski mask,
He
essentially.
really kind of looks like the Rainn Wilson's character in
What's that movie called?
crap, what was
Super?
that
No,
movie?
not that.
Super.
Is that what
Yeah,
it's called?
he reminded me a lot of him.
Yeah. And then we also meet someone whose name is Panda, and he just wears a giant panda mask, like a sports mascot panda mask.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a really weird, and we should say Don Johnson's character is not wearing a mask. He's the chief of police, and he is not wearing a mask. Um,
Yes.
so, but anyway, that whole scene is a very again, it's an exposition heavy scene, but it's not painfully exposition heavy.
Sure.
Um, yeah. So, yeah. Let's see. A couple other things I wanted to discuss. Okay, so we get a couple of things here. We see Nixonville, which is the name of essentially a district in Tulsa, which appears to be a trailer park for Seventh Cavalry members, or at
Yeah,
least
essentially,
racists,
which
or I don't
yeah,
really know how
it
it's
was
described.
yeah. I thought that part was maybe a little heavy-handed, but it was also such a short segment that I think it worked. It was funny if just because of the giant Nixon like bobblehead statue outside of the
Yes.
trailer park.
Yeah. Agreed. And so then, so he is there. She goes after somebody who is Seventh Cavalry, and brings him in, and turns him over to Looking Glass, who puts him in something they call the Pod. And this gave me very much Room 32 Lost vibes. Remember that room that the others had?
Yes, yeah, the
42,
like
room
Jacob
42.
room.
Room 42. Yes, the Jacob room, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But Looking Glass interrogates people, and usually his mask is like this reflective surface. That looks like the hottest thing any humans ever worn on their face. Like, I can't imagine how sweaty you would get walking
Well, and
around
there
with
was
it.
like a weird scene where he was wiping his face off with his
Yes,
mask
his
off
mask
with
off.
like a
Yeah,
yellow cloth, which was weird. Um, Also, when light shines on that mask, it looks quite similar to another famous mask.
perhaps a
D-
Rorschach mask.
Perhaps.
um. Okay, so the interrogation room, and basically, Looking Glass says that that he is trained, and so he can tell when someone's lying in this room, and he's lying. And then Sister Night's like, okay, I'll take care of this, and then she beats the shit out of the guy and gets him to admit sort of where the Seventh Cavalry is planning their next. I guess where their hideout is essentially.
Yeah. Can I say that I am like very very um I have Looking Glass on watch now, like one because of the way that his mask looked in that scene, and also because like Tim Blake Nelson is like the most Rorschach. Like when he was cast, I thought, oh, he's playing Rorschach.
Right.
He is Walter Kovacs,
He and
you know.
Jackie Earl Haley could be like cousins.
Exactly, exactly. And so, part of me one wonders if that's just the creators kind of playing with expectation,
Right.
and setting up a red herring. But then, on the other hand, maybe he is a mole.
Right. Um. Again, it is so hard not to talk about things that I know already. Uh, so incredible. You got to catch up quick, Zach, so we can talk about this stuff.
Okay, okay.
Um, but so there's a scene where they go to this cattle farm where the Seventh K is holed up. They are like mining watch batteries for reasons we don't really know yet. But then there's a very
Um,
go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say well, I'll save it till the end. Go
Okay.
ahead.
There's a very violent shootout involving lots of cow parts flying everywhere. Super
Oh,
gross.
so gross.
Super gross. There is a poster in the house that is an old advertisement for a bank with dollar bill on it.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you spotted that or not.
I did,
I like
yeah.
paused a bunch of things here to see what it was. So that's interesting. But so basically they run them out of this house, and then you find out that fucking Don Johnson is in Archimedes, or something very similar to Archimedes, the night owl's flying contraption, basically above this farm. Which is the first like really overt Watchmen thing we've seen.
Oh man, yeah, I left that out. I forgot about that when I was thinking of my two things. So there's still one more thing.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, if that wasn't Archimedes,
It
that was
had,
certainly a
yeah,
prototype. Or Archimedes was the prototype for that.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Now we're gonna get to the stuff that I cannot wait to talk about, which is the Adrian Veidt stuff.
So weird.
Okay, so
So good.
Adrian Veidt, played by the amazing Jeremy Irons, who's so good and just chewing scenery in all of these moments. So he is in this castle. I believe he rides up on a horse the first time we see him, correct?
He does. Yeah, he does.
And he is
And
brought.
his thighs are a little raw because of it.
Yes, and so we see a servant like massaging his thighs. When I watched this with my wife, she thought that she was doing more than just massaging his thighs,
Uh-huh.
which
Because
is
he's completely nude in the scene.
yes, yes. Um, and then we see he has clothes brought to him, and he says, "Well, these are pretty formal." And they're like, "What's your anniversary, sir?" And then they sing him for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow." They give him a cake that is kind of like squid-ish, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to describe what it is, but
It's not quite unlike the squid monster from the original Watchmen.
yes, it is very similar to that. So then he blows up the candle, and he he wants to cut the cake, and his servant hands him a horseshoe instead of a knife. And we don't really get an understanding of why that happens. It just is there. And we move on from it then.
Yeah.
Uh, so then he talks about how he's writing a play. And what was the name of that play, Zach?
The play, if I recall correctly, is The Watchmaker's Son.
Yes.
And who do we know who is a watchmaker's son
Yes.
that is prominently featured in Watchmen?
Yes, that would be one John Osterman, is it?
Osterman, yeah, I
Yeah.
believe that's correct.
Um,
Who we see in this episode.
how do we see him? I'm trying to think.
There is a news broadcast of
Oh
him
yes,
on Mars.
Yes, we see him building on Mars, which is
And it's not
interesting.
made clear, I don't think, if that is just, old footage of, Watchmen era. It's very, very high fidelity if it is.
Yes.
But I think that I guess they did have some technological advancements back then because of Dr. Manhattan. But
Right.
it's not made clear if that is past footage or present.
Right. Um, so then we get a dinner scene at Angela's house with Judd and his wife, and Angela and her kids and her husband Cal, the very attractive Cal. And Judd does a little booger sugar, a little cocaine, um, and for reasons that were not really made clear of why he's just doing a bump in the kitchen at this dinner party, but he is. Then he sings another song from Oklahoma. He sings "People Will Say We're in Love," and it's a very charming scene where he's dancing with the kids and with his wife, and it's a nice scene.
Mm-hmm.
And then so they go their separate ways, and then he gets a phone call that he wants that the police officer is that he woke up. Is that what we hear?
Yeah, he woke up.
The
Yeah.
police officer that was shot in the beginning of this episode, and so he goes out to see him, and as he's driving, he has his tires slashed by like a strip that's laid out in the road, and then he sees this light flashing. Right? I guess it looks like it's almost flashing, like it looks almost like a spotlight in his face.
Right, yeah.
And then um we go back to Angela. She gets a phone call, and she is summoned to go someplace. And the person on the end of the phone call says, "I know who you are, so don't bother wearing a mask." And she drives, and she sees. I guess she knows, she's told where she goes or whatever, and she gets there, and she sees the flashlight again, and she walks up to this big giant tree, and sitting in front of the tree is the old man in the wheelchair from the beginning of the episode, and strung up in the tree is Chief Judd, and he is very dead.
He's very dead, and the man in the wheelchair has a note that we've seen before.
Yes, the note says, "Watch over this boy." Now this is what I was talking about with, if you know Oklahoma, there's a song called "Poor Judd is Dead," and the line from that song is, "It's summer and we're running out of ice." And so I feel like if you put that together, you would think, oh, there's a major character named Judd here, and it's pretty much as if you know the musical, it's a very big hint, to
Okay.
what's coming.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. I
Um,
think I had actually so I heard that bit in the song at the end, but I think I had forgotten that his first name was Judd, and so that piece of the puzzle ties it all together well. Yeah.
yeah. Um, I did want to say one quick thing, by the way, which is that when Judd is in the car, he's listening to some sort of right wing radio broadcast, and they refer to Robert Redford as the Sun Dancer in Chief, which I
Yes.
loved it so much.
Yes. Yeah, that very good. Yeah, a lot of good world building again in things like that. Things that, you it's in the background, it's not overt. If you catch it, it's just a nice nod.
Yeah, yeah, it was. Yeah, there's a lot of that. So, when talking about this episode as a whole, well, first of all, was the other overt Watchmen thing Dr. Manhattan?
Yeah, that was the
Okay,
other one that I was thinking
yeah.
about. Yeah.
Um, in talking about this episode, I don't think there's any part of it that truly doesn't work.
I would agree. Yeah.
I think that some parts work better than others, and some parts are clearly laying the groundwork for other things.
Mhm.
Um, but I also thought, like, we mentioned before, sort of the beginning of the episode feeling very similar to the introductory episodes of seasons 2 and 3 of The Leftovers. But I also have to say that the end of the episode is very much a reference to Lost, where there's in the pilot of Lost, there is a pilot, the pilot of the airplane, who we are led to believe in that episode is going to be a major character, and then that character winds up dead in a tree at the end of the pilot.
Man, good call. I didn't actually even make that connection. Yeah, very, very good. Played by J.J. Abrams' good friend Greg Grunberg.
Yes, Snap Wexley himself.
Snap Wexley, the legendary resistance fighter.
um, so yeah, so there were a lot of Lindelofisms, and this is also the episode. I'll say this, I think, without spoilers. This is the episode that visually plays with things like clocks and smiley faces the most.
Yeah, there's a ticking clock throughout most of the dinner scene and following as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when
Yeah.
Angela is baking for the class, she is scooping up egg whites. I mean, sorry, egg yolks rather, and the egg yolks make a smiley face in the bowl at one point.
Yeah,
And
it's very cute.
yeah,
It's very
and we should say, like,
not quite tongue in cheek, but almost.
yes, the most overt bit of that is the episode ends with blood dripping on Judd's badge,
Hmm.
which is very much a comedian thing, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, and in the exact same, kind of like 5 minutes to midnight position,
Yes,
from the comedian's button.
button. Um,
Button.
so sometimes I feel like talking about something can make my opinion on it change a little bit. Has
Same,
talking about the
yeah.
episode with me changed the way you felt about it at all?
I think it made me like it more than I already. I think it's taken away a little bit of my trepidation, just kind of talking it out. Um, it's Yeah, I think I can now, like talking about it, say that I liked the first episode pretty soundly. Um, and I'm very interested to see what happens next.
Well, next is an episode called Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship, which is quite a title.
Yeah.
Um, and we will have a lot more to talk about with that episode. I have to say, like, one of the things that I was very concerned about, and I think I said this to you when we first talked about this, is that I could see people say that this episode, and to a certain degree the second episode, are boring. That
I can
there are
Oh,
little
go ahead.
spots of action that happen, but a lot of it is not super Watchmen-y.
It's well, I would almost argue against that because I think that Watchmen itself wasn't a very high action series. A lot of it was just kind of the tenseness of the moment to moment things.
Sure, I can
And some of the
and there is a corollary to that here.
yeah, probably like the most iconic issue of Watchmen, I think the fourth one, which is Dr. Manhattan, um, and kind of like jumping through time, that is just almost entirely all in his head, essentially, him
Right.
talking. And yeah, so
But
I
what
can
I'll
definitely see what you mean though about
Mhm.
it, at least in like this climate of like television and coming off of this is, I guess, like really, other than, and unless you count something like Chernobyl or something, this is kind of like the big marquee um HBO show following Game of Thrones,
Yes.
um, which was very high action in some places.
Yeah, and I guess what I also meant was that there are two very different audiences for this show. There are the folks like you and me who are familiar with the comic, and there are folks who are going to be coming in cold. And I think for the folks coming in cold, they're going to find this very boring.
Or even, I mean, like, I don't want I don't want to sound like such like a pretentious like douche, but I mean, there are the people who are like familiar with Watchmen through the book, and then people who are familiar through it from the film, and that's gonna bring like a different um different baggage, different expectations.
Yeah,
I think
yeah, I definitely
there's
concur
no
with that.
Bob Dylan in this.
No, there is not. Just a lot of Oklahoma music.
Yeah,
Uh, um, but yeah, any final words?
it's good, I think.
Yeah, I said this a couple of times, but each episode really does. The, the first two episodes are the most similar of any of the episodes in the show. Once you hit episode three, stuff starts coming fast at you, and I think that that will be the real test for a lot of people if they like the way the show changes when episode three hits. That's all I'll
Interesting.
say for now. Anyway,
Okay.
thank you for listening to us talk about this, guys. This is a lot of fun, and we're gonna do this every week. The show is on. You can find Zach on Twitter at LookerFox. I'm at Brian Needs a Nap, and subscribe to the show. Throw up a comment if you like it. Tell your friends who are watching the show. Check us out, and we shall be back next week. And remember, who watches The Watchmen? Zach and Brian watch The Watchmen.